amazing we are gathered in this evening. So a very warm welcome. I do understand that you could be preparing for some other events this evening. I'm so pleased that you've turned out. Of course, I was reminded earlier that Bart is Dutch.
Make it hard right away.
Yes, so this evening, at least some of the party will be happy after the football later on. So by way of transition, of course, Bill Shankly, that famous football coach, said, "Some people think football is a matter of life and death. I don't think like that. I can assure them that it is much more serious than that." And of course, that's our particular perspective on productivity. It is one of the defining characteristics which will determine living standards and, to a very real extent, life and death and your prospects therein. So that's the magnitude of the issues that we're here to discuss this evening. And we're very, very excited by the group of really exceptional people that we have been able to gather this evening. We're so excited that they're also joining us, not just for the event, but they're joining us in our community of scholars here in EMBS as part of our distinguished cadre of honorary professors. So just a little bit about Tera, Catherine, and Tony. So their honorary professorships will be associated with the Productivity Institute. That's a national research organisation which we host here in EMBS, and it is funded by the Economic and Social Research Council. And their appointment and the position of the Productivity Institute here in EMBS really underlines our commitment to addressing the productivity challenges, the productivity puzzle, and translating productivity gains really into improved living standards and well-being across the UK. The timing, if you've been following the election and post-election conversation, it couldn't be more important and timely. So our colleagues here this evening are highly respected scholars within the productivity research and policy communities, and indeed far beyond. All three have been immense supporters of the Productivity Institute and its work, and it's a huge privilege to welcome them to our community here in Manchester. So let me briefly introduce them. Professor Tera Allas, CBE, is the Director of Research and Economics in McKinsey & Company's United Kingdom and Ireland office, and leads McKinsey's research on the macroeconomic outlook, growth, and on productivity. She was previously Deputy Head of the UK Government Economic Service and brings together more than 3 decades of experience in strategy, corporate finance, economics, and public policy. Tera also serves as the chair of the Productivity Institute's advisory committee and as trustee of Be the Business, a charity that delivers productivity research and improvement in small businesses. And again, that's a strategic partner with the TPI. Professor Catherine Mann, lovely to have you with us. Also, Catherine is an external member of the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee. Previously, she was the Global Chief Economist at Citibank, Chief Economist at the OECD, and has previously held academic think tank and policy positions. Her research focuses on international economic issues encompassing trade, finance, climate, productivity, and inequality. And she also leads the Finance, Investment, and Productivity Research Programme within the Productivity Institute. Now, finally, welcome to Professor Anthony Venables also. a senior research fellow in the Department of Economics at the University of Oxford, where he previously held VP Professor of Economics position. From 2020 to 2022, Tony held the position of Research Director at the Productivity Institute, and he's published extensively in international trade, spatial economics, including work on trade, imperfect competition, economic integration, multinational firms, and economic geography, and no doubt many other areas as well. So today, Tera, Catherine and Tony will explore how productivity can fundamentally alter our path of economic progress and business success. So welcome again to those joining us physically and virtually online. I'll hand over to Bart, who will MC the rest of the lecture this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ken, and hello, everyone. My name is Bart van Ark. I'm the Managing Director of the Productivity Institute. And yes, I'll do my uttermost best to hide my Dutch accent. We get this time, but it is what it is. Thank you, Ken, for the great introductions and welcoming our three honorary professors here at the ANBS. And indeed, I would share with you how happy we all are with Tera, Catherine, and Tony, giving us some of their precious time. We know that time is precious with the Productivity Institute over time. But even for honorary professors, an honor doesn't come for free. So we have given them a very tough task because we asked them today to think big, but at the same time also try to be as concrete as possible. And hence the umbrella title that you've seen for this event, which is the transformative power of productivity. Productivity is very concrete, transformative is big, and trying to bring these two things together is the challenge. Indeed, we've got some huge economic, societal, and geopolitical changes and challenges going on, including a technology evolution or revolution, whatever you want to call it. Big demographic changes, including aging, but also migration, and of course, climate change and the move towards net zero. And they all have an impact on productivity, but they also if we deliver productivity well, it can also help us to mitigate some of these challenges and to even turn them into some real opportunities. And we'll see that all three of our honorary professors today will be talking about it from both perspectives. How can we actually, how does this impact on productivity, these big changes that are happening, but also how can productivity help to resolve them? So our agenda is as follows. First, Tera will speak for about 20 minutes about technological transformation, and notably how AI, artificial intelligence, can help to raise productivity. And after that, Silvia Massini, who is a professor of economics and management of innovation here at ANBS, will have a brief 10-minute conversation with Tera, and hopefully during that conversation we'll have time to one or two questions. Welcome also to everyone who is of course joining us today. After that, we will continue with Catherine, and Catherine will speak about business investment, and especially about how managers determine decisions to invest or not to invest. One of the big topics that we are currently looking at in the UK is how can we get investment back up. And following her talk, she'll speak for about 10 minutes with Professor Philip McCann, who holds the Sir Thierry Leahy Chair in Urban Institute. So again, a 10-minute conversation. Hopefully, we'll have from you as well. And then last but not least, Venables will speak for about 15 minutes. We have a brief conversation with Jared Hodgkinson, who is a professor of strategic management here at ANBS. And then to close up the proceedings, I'll have the pleasure to sit down with all our three honorary professors for the final 20 minutes of this event to discuss some of the overarching themes that are being discussed today on transformative productivity, what transformative productivity means in practice for us researchers, but also for the business and policy community. Somehow I've lost my sound, but I'm not sure why. Yes, here it's back. So we have a lot to do, just as I'm going to wrap up. And as MC, I'll do my best to gently keep everyone on time. I will have to try to do that. I've already been warned. so that we do have time for drinks, for some informal conversations, and that you can get home or anywhere else you want to go for the football. So without any further ado, it's my pleasure. On whether AI. Thank you, Tera.
The opportunity to be here. In order to be presenting alongside such eminent and accomplished colleagues. And it's a real delight to be sharing and hopefully discussing and debating some of the research that we have done on the impact of AI specifically on the global economy, but tonight focusing on the impact on the UK productivity puzzle and our problems with productivity that's flagging. Now, with an exam question like this, which is very forward-looking, it's really important to state upfront that we don't have a crystal ball. We don't really know how AI is going to impact, how quickly it's going to be adopted, how it's going to change how we work, and what it's going to do to productivity growth. So keep that in mind. Now, I will nevertheless provide nuance and some more of the detail. I just ask which of you have actually tried using AI or ChatGPT, any one of these bots, etc. Great, quite a lot of you. Now, the one thing you need to know about that is the AI we see today is the worst AI you will ever see. The technology is getting better all the time. Which of you have tried it and thought it was a bit rubbish and given up? Ooh, no one's given up. Wow, one person maybe. Well, that's an excellent sign. Because, you know, even if you try it every couple of months, you'll find that it's now better, it's different, it is applicable to a different set of use cases and so on. So we need to keep that in mind as we try and speculate about what it might do to the UK's productivity. There's a lot of uncertainty about the impact. The one thing there's no uncertainty about is that productivity growth is mission critical to the UK growth agenda. The Labour government has just made growth one of its missions. And if you think about growth in terms of output for the country, then there are really only two ways to raise growth. It is either to increase the number of hours people are working, and that's mostly to do with demographics and the number of people in the workforce, or it is to improve what we call labour productivity, the amount of output per hour that is produced. And you'll see that that second thing is actually really critical. Now, there is actually some good news on the first bit, in the sense that the UK demographics are surprisingly positive. I was surprised when I looked at this data. We actually still have a growing population, at least we expect to have one, and that is very different to places like Japan or South Korea. And in fact, the working age part of that population is also growing, which is very different to Germany or to Italy or many Eastern European countries. So we can expect some element of growth just from the fact that there are more people producing more output. But this growth, even in the working age population, is pretty modest. It's about 0.4% per annum. It gives us a sort of baseline of what to expect. Now, of course, in an ideal world, we would have more of those people, even more of them participate in the workplace. But if we had that, it still wouldn't be enough. So if we get current productivity, but a little bit more participation, we might get growth rates of the economy of around 0.9%. So nowhere close to the sort of 2 or 3% that we got used to in the good old days, and we might aspire to right now. It's really only with extra productivity that we're going to get close to those sort of bigger and more ambitious numbers. And there is absolutely no doubt that AI and other automation technologies have enormous potential here. McKinsey Global Institute has done a kind of bottom-up analysis of all of the work done in the global economy, and they've concluded that 70% of it could be automated with today's technology. So we don't even need any advances in technology. It could be done in theory now. And if we were to do that overnight, we'd get a boost in productivity of more than 200%. Amazing. But of course, it's not going to happen overnight. It is not happening overnight. In a sort of midpoint scenario, McKinsey Global Institute is projecting that maybe by 2030, something like 30% of the hours or slightly less might actually get automated. The number for the UK is a little bit smaller, but it's in the same kind of order of magnitude. And that would indeed give a very material boost to our productivity. When you put that into per annum figures, then we would be looking at 3% a year. So that would be great. But underpinning all of that, there are a very large range of different adoption paths. And it's quite interesting to look at what those look like. So the lines on this graph are sort of a fast and a slow adoption rate. And the dotted lines are what we thought they were going to be 5 years ago. And there are sort of three really interesting things about this. First of all, we do think that adoption has speeded up. And that's partly because the technology has just become easier to adopt. Some of the generative AI stuff in particular is quite user-friendly. Secondly, if we're on this accelerated adoption path, then by 2060, all of the work done by people could be done by machines, not just some percentage. You may remember when Rishi Sunak interviewed Elon Musk, and Elon Musk said, well, there will be a day when we don't need any jobs anymore. We don't need people. Machines will do all of the work. Well, technically, that's eminently plausible. Now, in practice, whether we actually adopt technology to that degree is very much a question mark. And perhaps the most important part of this chart is that the range between those adoption scenarios is absolutely enormous. And there are good reasons to be questioning whether we can expect to be on the fast path. The final thing I'll say in the kind of positive direction, though, is one of the things that might mean that AI really is at the heart of a revolution in productivity is that it might transform the process of innovation itself. When we look at the sort of use cases where AI is particularly adept at improving productivity, R&D, research and development, software development, and many marketing and kind of customer-related functions fall into those buckets. If we therefore enhance the productivity of R&D and innovation, that might actually have a big impact on our overall productivity. But there are reasons to be cautious, as I mentioned. And personally, I'm a little bit of a skeptic as to how quickly we'll start seeing any of this in the aggregate figures. And there are big reasons for that. The most important reason is probably that when we do these sort of estimates of 70% of hours could be automated or 3.1% percentage growth in productivity, we're talking about automating tasks. And one of the best known and kind of really replicated example of really reliable productivity improvements from generative AI and co-pilots is in software development. Teams using these tools do actually churn out 70% more output per unit of input consistently and at that same quality as before. But my son is a computer scientist and a software developer. He doesn't spend his whole time coding. Not at all. He spends a lot of it talking to customers, talking to his colleagues, his team members, his boss, trying to understand the software and the hardware environment in which he's doing the coding, puzzling out some really complex system level questions that the AI is not really very good at being able to help with. And so when we added all these tasks up to actual jobs Monday to Friday, then we get a much smaller number. And the studies that have been done here are mostly around call center operators. Still a very material improvement in productivity, around 14%, but nothing like the 70%. And of course, not everybody is a call center operator, not everybody is a software developer. And so when we add it up across the entire economy, and we include, bus drivers and teachers and nurses and dentists and you name it, then we find that actually a very small number of jobs can be significantly automated. And so this means that it gets diffused, this impact of the AI, even if it is quite substantive and quite transformative for specific tasks. And ChatGPT is a really good example of this. So quite a lot of you put your hand up earlier on saying you have used it or something similar. And it is phenomenal in one sense, in the sense that it is the fastest ever technology adopted in the world. It took only 2 months for 100 million people to sign up. And, it increased to 180 million, and now it's sort of pretty stable at that level. And people are using it. They're using it for specific tasks. But then, you know, the flip side of it is that this is ultimately only 5% of the workforce of the globe. So the other 95% are not using it and therefore not benefiting from it, even assuming the 180 million is unique users, which I'm pretty sure it isn't. But broadly speaking, it's a very smaller number of people who are using it. And the average person is spending 8 minutes on the site when they do use ChatGPT. So that's hardly transformative for their productivity. Or maybe I can ask you, which of you think that your productivity has been transformed because of using ChatGPT? Oh, wonderful. There are a couple of you. So you're in the minority here. Most people don't get those kind of benefits, but I'm glad to see that there are some, and there obviously are lots of use cases for it. And the other reason why this doesn't really scale to the global sort of numbers is that ChatGPT is really at the bottom of the hierarchy when we think about all these technologies. It's a tiny sub-example of a tiny set of models, which are a tiny sub-universe of all AI and all digital technology and all automation technology. And when people talk about the 70% automation numbers and stuff like that, they're really talking about the top level here. And this is one of the reasons it's really, really, really difficult to get any reasonable answers to the question, well, is anybody adopting this stuff? Because it depends on what stuff we're talking about, right? But there are some numbers. And so the ONS does publish data, which they get from businesses that they survey around, have you adopted artificial intelligence? And their definition of artificial intelligence is somewhere between kind of 3 and 4 here. It's specific applications that use AI that can automate certain parts of your production process or certain functions in your business. And when you ask that question, 13% of businesses say that, yes, we have adopted AI. And turns out that that's probably an underestimate in the sense that that's 13% of all businesses as counted by number of business. And it's very biased towards very small businesses because 95% of businesses in this country have fewer than 10 employees. So the number for the whole business universe ends up being more or less the same number as the one for micro businesses. As you would expect, as you get to bigger and bigger businesses, more and more of them have adopted some of these technologies. But that's not the interesting part of this chart, I think. I think what's really interesting is that the light blue also gets bigger as you get to bigger businesses. Bigger and bigger businesses are not sure if they have adopted AI or the specific technologies mentioned in the survey. So how is this even possible? How can you not know if you have adopted it? Well, I think there are 2 big kind of fundamental features of the latest wave of AI technology that explain this. And the first one is that it's very decentralized. Anyone can basically sign up to ChatGPT and start using it. They might not tell their boss. They might have incentives not to tell their boss. And when we ask people rather than businesses, something like 30% of people in Britain say they have used AI for work. I've intentionally left out the younger age cohorts who use AI a lot more, but a lot of that might be students, so it doesn't therefore apply. But even among the people who are more likely to be just working, quite a lot say where, you know, there's more of them than businesses say that they're using it. So that's interesting. So it's very decentralized, but it's also very embedded. So when you ask those businesses who have adopted AI, well, how did they adopt it? By far the biggest mode of adoption is we just bought a piece of software that happens to already be using AI. So that could be anything from Google Maps and Waze to your software that you run your customer relationship management system on, or what have you. And this is likely why we're not going to see, it's going to be kind of invisible adoption that we're going to not see. I don't know how to put that. It's going to be inside jobs, it's going to be inside software, it's going to be inside hardware, and it's going to be kind of seeping in it by stealth. We will eventually see some productivity improvements out of it, but probably only after people start very thoughtfully redesigning jobs, redesigning processes, and redesigning organizations to actually get the productivity benefits out of it. And it's not going to be enough to just invest in this bit of software. We know from all kinds of literature out there that to get benefits from ICT investment, you also need to invest in physical infrastructure and you need to invest in skills. And this is just one example, looking at productivity growth rates across Europe in different sectors and in different countries. Whoops, let's go back. Where the green means high productivity growth and blue means low productivity growth. And it's just illustrating that if you only invest in training, which is on the y-axis, then you don't get a lot of productivity growth. If you only invest in software, but not a lot in training, around number 2 there, then again, you don't get a lot of productivity growth. When you invest in both at the same time, that's when you start getting the kind of multiplicative effect of productivity growth. And of course, if you invest huge amounts in software and you basically take the human out of the loop, which is number 4 in this chart, then you also get a huge boost in productivity. So investing in those skills really is critical so that we get bang for buck for any of this investment that might go into AI and its adoption, and that we actually start to see some actual productivity gains from it. And there's another reason why investing in skills is critical, because, you know, in the bottom right-hand corner, some humans will be taken out of the loop. Some people will lose their jobs because they were fully automated away. We've estimated that in the UK, that might be something in the order of 2 million jobs between now and 2030. That's about 6% of the total people in employment. So it's not enormous, but it's still a pretty material number. Those people will not have the same job to go to in some other region or some other business. They will need to move occupations. And to do that, the good news is that they will most likely be moving up the occupational ladder. On the right-hand side here, you can see the sort of estimates of where we think there will be more jobs created. And they are typically in the more professional, in the more highly skilled and highly paid occupations. But of course, to do those occupations, you need a very different skills mix. You need a lot more social and emotional skills and team working, project management, that kind of stuff. You need a lot more technological skills as well. And so if we want those people, the 2 million or so, to not fall through the cracks and actually have meaningful work for them, they need to be upskilled alongside all the other people in the workforce who will also need to be reskilled in order to use this technology well. So I hope I've convinced you that we need to kind of shift of mindset. AI does not equal all automation technology. We need to think bigger than that. Technical potential does not equal adoption and impact. We need to think about that second part of the equation just as hard as we think about the technology. And there are a couple of other sort of mindset shifts that I think we're going to need in order to really drive transformation through these technologies. The first one is around R&D. There's a lot said about how we need more investment in R&D. Sure. But we also need that R&D investment to be accompanied by investment and activity that drives adoption and usage. If you just do R&D and create a patent that goes on a shelf, it's not created really any economic value. Secondly, there's a lot of talk about unicorns and superstar firms. Absolutely, we need champions globally in the UK so we can continue to export a lot of good stuff. But we also need our average businesses to adopt this technology and adopt various different management practices, because they are the ones who employ most of the people. And that's where that's only where we can get the sort of aggregate productivity growth if we look at it. We need to move from thinking about just education. Yes, it's super important that young people have the skills for the future and thrive. But, you know, the people who need them most are actually already in the workforce. They're not going back to university. They're not probably going to go back to any kind of college. They need to be trained as part of their working lives. And we're not paying enough attention, in my opinion, to that part of the equation. We need to move away from believing that just having the incentives will make businesses adopt this stuff in a productive way. They've had the incentives for decades. AI has existed for at least 10 years in formats that are very usable and they're very specific use cases. But it's hard work to actually implement it. And businesses will need co-investment, support, management and leadership skills, and all kinds of nudges, frankly, to pay attention and to pick up the opportunities. And finally, we rightfully spend a lot of time talking about capital investment. It's hugely important for productivity growth, whether it's public sector or private sector investment, whether it's infrastructure or it's ICT or it's other kinds of investment. But unless we put those projects together into packages that are complementary and at scale at a local level, we're probably not going to see the boost in productivity we're all hoping for. And so hopefully those sort of mindset shifts will allow us ultimately to make the most of this opportunity. Thanks very much for listening. I'm going to hand back to Bart to start the discussion.
Thank you very much, Tera, and also keeping us on time with this whirlwind through technology and AI. And let me welcome Sylvia to start some conversation, and one or two questions we can take from the audience for the last couple of minutes, please.
Yes, does this work? No. Hello?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Bart at TPI, for inviting me and have the opportunity of having a conversation with Tera. I really, really enjoyed your presentation. It touches on a lot of things that I'm studying myself. So I would have a lot of questions, but I have 3 questions. Let's see. One question is about what are we measuring with AI? When you talk about adoption of AI, you showed a couple of slides where we saw the variety of technologies, tasks included in AI. And it's a general question because adoption can be at a low level. You touched upon the high proportion of users of ChatGPT, but we don't know what they do with that. So the bigger question is when we try and see the impact of adoption of digital technologies, AI on productivity, how can we really measure that?
Well, it's very hard. I don't think we will ever be able to measure it in the same way that we can measure temperature in a room, or we can measure the causal impact of the sun rising and the temperature rising at the same time, because exactly the reasons you put. I think we can, however, try lots of different tacks of asking people primarily, have you adopted? What are you using it for? You know, has it improved your productivity? And then having alongside some measures of actual productivity. So that's why these randomized control trials are so helpful, even though they are quite narrow in call centers or in software houses or whatever, because those are in areas in which it's quite easy to measure output. So we can start to get a flavor for the impact. I don't think we'll ever get a full-blown detailed answer. The second thing is when we ask people, we need to be very specific, because if you just say, are you using AI? I think most people will say randomly yes or no. If they know that AI is already embedded in their smartphone, they'll say yes, because like 100% based on that more or less are using AI. If they don't really know what it is, they might say no, or I don't know. So you need to kind of specify what you mean by it and give examples. And this is, of course, time consuming and arduous. But if we don't do it, then we have no idea what the answers mean. So I think it's a matter of picking a number of different ways of measuring it and then collating those and synthesizing it to get a broader picture.
Yes, I totally agree that it's important to specify what aspects of AI, because I'm doing research on the adoption of digital technologies, and it comes out that 90% of businesses adopt cloud computing, but then cloud computing is using the internet. So of course they do. So we need to be a bit more precise when we ask these questions and the content of what we're trying to analyze. So related to this, exactly because of this study that I do on adoption of digital technologies, we also find that there is quite a lot of adoption of joint adoption of technology. So there are complementarities among the digital technologies and the cloud computing and the AI. AI needs big data. Internet of Things needs big data, AI, and then it's used for robotics. So do you have any sense of actually the difficulty of adopting digital technologies also comes from the fact that it's not only one single technology? So in services, probably yes, and it is AI and big data. But for manufacturing or for companies that are in between, do you see any evidence of the need for also look at the joint adoption of digital technologies?
Definitely yes. I mean, I would say there probably are some use cases where it's just a matter of download the software and go. And that can already produce a benefit to your workers in the front line, for example. But in most cases, when we ask businesses what some of the barriers are to adoption or actually squeezing out the benefits, they have to do with exactly that, the interoperability. So I've got this CRM system here, but I've got a separate database of invoices over there. And then I've got this ERP system. And really what I need for them is to talk to each other. And this actually already applies to just the service sector. And then you take into account the sort of more hardware aspects of it in manufacturing, and it's a lot of it is around that. There's even a difficulty beyond that, which is, of course, before you touch even a single piece of technology, you really should be thinking about the workflows and the processes. So if you start automating processes that are badly designed, then you're just going to get a very efficient but badly run system. And so it takes a lot of premeditation to do it well. A lot of businesses are very busy, so they don't necessarily have the resources for that premeditation, and therefore it is quite challenging. And lots of businesses also adopt something and they think it didn't work, and then they never adopt anything again because they kind of get burned. It's quite a complicated set of challenges.
Yes, and now I would like to switch to skills, because you told how important they are, and this is another aspect of my research funded by the TPI. And I'm looking at the importance of skills for the adoption of technology, digital technologies, the development of digital technologies themselves. So the patenting activities based on skills. And so the big question there is that we're asking in our paper is what comes first? Do companies need skills to adopt or develop technologies, or once they start the process, realize that what are the skills that they need? And one piece of research also showed us that management skills are actually very important, and they might be the answer to this question, because the good managers know what comes first. So because I work on data, I would like to know your view on this, because you have a more experience with the real businesses.
So I think I couldn't have put it better myself. When we work with kind of actual businesses on the ground, but also some of the research does suggest that good management really is at the heart of quite a lot of this. First of all, it's at the heart of thinking about the systems and the workflows before you even start purchasing any kind of technology, so that you've already thought about what are you trying to get out of it, rather than just hoping. And I think some businesses just hope that if I spend this money on this IT, it'll transform my business, without actually any hard work into changing behaviors and workflows and practices in the business. But it's also about confidence and technological literacy. So management that's fairly confident that they don't necessarily know the technology in and out, but they know their own business and they know how they want to use it. And they can push their suppliers, for example, to deliver and design systems that are fit for purpose for them. And then they can then also recognize the skills that they need in their workplace is part of that journey. But I don't know that there's any one kind of starting point. Every business starts at a slightly different point, depending on the owners and the managers and what their historical background is. And so for each of them, there might be a slightly different thing that nudges them along that process.
Very good. Thank you very much. So I think we need.
Yeah, I think we have time maybe for one question from the floor, and if there's one online, we can take it. A question is not a comment. So if you want to make a comment, you can pack it in a question, but it's still a short question. So if there's anyone in the floor, is anyone online, Jim? No? Yes, Ken. Sorry.
So I'll ask a question then, Tera, really fascinating. Have you looked at it segmentally, and do you have any observations on universities adopting AI?
So I have not looked at it, but certainly in all the research that's been done, all the literature, education is coming up as a really, really hot topic for multiple reasons. Both the potential could be enormous. There's quite a lot of kind of menial tasks that take place in an education setting that could be done by a machine, and with some humans still in the loop, could increase people's productivity and then allow teachers, for example, to spend more time with pupils and doing the human aspect of the job. But it's of course also a setting where some of the challenges are the biggest around how do young people who only ever learned how to write well with ChatGPT or only ever learned how to do research with internet tools or whatever, how do they nevertheless learn themselves the skills of synthesis, the skills of critical thinking, the skills of spotting the errors, because there will be errors. And I think that just requires an extra layer of thoughtfulness in the education process to still be teaching those fundamental skills, even though you have these extra tools that make some tasks easier. So I would expect there to be quite a transformation, but hopefully a thoughtful one, which maintains the kind of core aspects of what education is all about, while making the most of the technology, because we really need productivity improvement in education just as much as in any other part of the society.
So final question is round for Steve, right at the back, Steve Roper.
So I'm fascinated by the notion of AI in innovation, but I might talk to you about that offline. My question, though, was whether you're optimistic about whether AI will lead to a more equitable society.
That's such an incredibly interesting question. I don't know, because I can see reasons why it could. We know from the research that it enhances people's ability to perform most for the people who have the least skills and the least performance to start with. So it could be an equalizing force. We also have a pretty good hunch that it will automate jobs that were not that great to start with. And if those people get re-skilled, they're going to have a better job that pays better and is high productivity. So that could be an equalizing force. At the flip side of it all, though, there are going to be big questions around digital access and literacy. And there are huge questions around bias. So personally, I'm incredibly worried that the vast majority of AI is programmed by men. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but there is going to be an element of bias in that. It's also all white men, more, well, not quite, actually not true if you go to Silicon Valley. But you know what, there's going to be a lot of issues around what's embedded in this staff that I don't think we can answer in advance. And for those kinds of situations, there are a lot of things we can't answer in advance, you know, with regulation or what have you. We're just going to kind of keep an eye on it ex post and then rectify as quickly as possible.
Great, a lot more to discuss, but as Steve said, we have to take it offline. Tera, thank you very much. And Sylvia, thank you for conducting this conversation.
Thank you.
And let's move straight on to our second lecture by Catherine Mann, who will speak about investment and particular role of manager decisions in investment. Welcome.
Well, thanks very much for the opportunity to come back to Manchester. This is the place to be to watch football. So, you know, I'm very happy to be here too. Tara was talking about adoption of AI. What I want to talk about is a little bit of a broader picture about business investment in the UK in general. This title, How High is the Hurdle Rate for Business Investment, is one side of the coin of, is there short-termism in the decision-making by both business managers and by financial investors to only take on projects that will make a good return fast. So a high hurdle rate is associated with short-termism. And the question is, are these problems particularly relevant for business investment in the UK? Have these two sides of the coin, high hurdle rates, short-termism, are these the reasons for holding back business investment in the UK? So I'm going to start with just a couple of facts, and then I'm also going to ask sort of the question, turn you know, the spotlight on me, which is, I'm a central banker. That's my day job. I'm Monetary Policy Committee at the Bank of England. Am I part of the problem? Am I part of the problem right now with you know, the bank rate at 525 basis points? So here we have the situation that we face with setting the stage. Why do I care about business investment in the UK? I care about business investment in the UK because it is an essential component of what we as central bankers call the speed limit at which the economy can grow without generating inflation. It's essential to be thinking about the supply side of the economy because that is the speed limit. That is it allows me to set bank rate in such a way to allow demand to meet supply. If supply is growing very slowly, then there's not a lot of room for me to maneuver using my tool, which is the short-term interest rate, in order to allow the economy to expand more robustly without generating inflation. So what this chart is showing you on the left-hand side in the green line is how sluggish business investment in the UK has been. It is at the bottom end of the league tables for the advanced economies, and it's been that way for a while. It had some periods of time in the past where it had a little bit more closer to about average, but it has deteriorated in terms of its growth rate and its share of GDP over time. If you compare that sort of cycle of the time series for business investment, and you take that over to the behavior of productivity growth in the UK economy, you can see for over different time periods the extent to which the productivity growth in the bars has deteriorated dramatically in post-global financial crisis, post-GFC, during the period between the GFC and Brexit, and then after the change in the trading relationships with the European Union. Is this pattern closely related to the policy rate of the central bank? Well, no, it's not the policy rate, because remember, between the GFC and 2019, or close to 2019, the policy rate was basically zero, the effective lower bound. And at that time, if it was the policy rate that was dampening business investment, then we should have seen business investment take off because the policy rate was zero. So there has to be something else that is important when we think about the relationship between interest rates, whether it's financial conditions more generally or the policy rate. There must be something else that is relevant for business investment in the UK and the productivity growth associated with the business investment. So I've come up with a framework for analysis. There is a longer paper on the TPI website, which goes into this framework for analysis in more depth. But what I want to do is outline these three different players, shall we say players out on the field, that are all relevant when thinking about the decision or the outcome of what we observe in the macroeconomy of business investment at the macro level, which is in the productivity growth associated with that, which you just saw on the other chart. Now, this is all going to be analysis and has been analysis done with microdata. So start with the economic equation. If you're an economist, you approach the question about what drives business investment using an NPV formula. There are cash flows over some period of time. You discount them at usually the 10-year gilt rate. And if a project is going to yield a rate of return greater than zero, then it's a good to go in your analysis as an economist. And when we do our economic analysis using data as economists, that's what we're looking for. What is the elasticity of business investment with respect to the cost of capital measure that is in the equation? And we don't find much. We don't find much of an elasticity at all, which is basically saying, however it is that the economists measure the cost of capital in lots of different ways, it doesn't seem to be capturing the theoretical relationship between the cost of capital and business investment. Now, a manager, you put your manager's hat on, you've got some remember at a business school here, so there are a bunch of managers. So managers have a different way of looking at it. First, managers have got internal information about how their business works. And that might change. That may be very different than a 10-year gilt yield or the policy rate. That's my rate. They have incentive compensation plans that make them want to pursue particular strategies of business investment that might yield return to the stock valuation of the firm, if that's an important part of their incentive compensation plan. They also may have more information about the relationship between the business investment in one part of the firm and how it might be related to complementary skills and so forth. That is what Tera was talking about earlier. So the cost of capital from the standpoint of a manager is very different from the measures of the cost of capital that we use when we do a standard economic analysis. Now, there's a third player here, though, which is I call them financiers, only because investment shows up in too many different vocabulary words here. Well, who are the financiers? They are the ones who are going to finance the investment. If you're some businesses, you can finance out of retained earnings. As you grow in size and you grow in complexity of the type of investment you want to undertake, you have to go to the market. You either go to a bank, you issue bonds, you issue equity. So financiers start to have their own view of whether or not the project that the manager says, I think this is a good project according to my metrics, the financier has to come in and say, well, is this a good project according to my metrics? And if it's a bank, it has to be thinking about not only the spread over bank rate, which whereas I come in to that again. They have to look at the spread of the bank rate, or they have to think about possibilities of default. If it is a equity, you have to think about whether or not that's going to yield a rate of return and a stock market evaluation that is consistent with what that stock market investor is interested in receiving. Short-term outcomes might be achieved there. So the third element that is critical here is, are the investors going to come and invest in the project? So I have these three different ways of thinking about the investment decision. Internally, where those three the Venn diagrams overlap, this is where you get financiers willing to invest in a project that managers say, yeah, I want to do this either because it's good for my company or it's good for my incentive compensation plan. And it kind of meets what economists think of as being relevant as well. And inside that overlap of the Venn is where what is going to be invested, it's going to be undertaken at, but it's not necessarily business investment that's inside that Venn. I have these two arrows down to two different kinds of investment that can be financed and can be chosen by an investment, by a manager. One is an actual business investment. It could be tangible capital, new machinery. It could be intangible capital, software, R&D. That is one type of business investment. But the financier and the manager could decide the investment that I want to undertake is a buyback of the stock. It could be a dividend payout. It could be, I want to have extra cash buffers. These financial investments don't have the same kind of productivity enhancing outcomes as business investment on the left-hand side. And so we have to really get down into the nuts and bolts of the data in order to evaluate which one of these investments is going to actually be undertaken. Cost of capital is central, but there's an awful lot of other things going on. So when we think about, when we're going to go to managers here, we're going to focus in on managers, and we're going to ask the question of them, what is the different types of costs of capital that are relevant to you when you make your investment decision? And this diagram here puts out a set of outcomes, measures of the cost of capital. They range from which is bank rate, that could be considered a cost of capital. It is for banks, for example. Average cost of loans for private non-financial companies, that's average businesses. Weighted average cost of capital, that incorporates both bond as well as equity, according to the weights. All of these are ex post costs of capital. You can look at them on the balance sheet. Something was undertaken, it's on the balance sheet. You can weight them up. You can see what it was. The only one that there is in red is the hurdle rate. This is ex ante. This is what a manager says, I need to have a project reach this hurdle rate before I'm even going to go to the market to try to get finance, or before I'm going to use my retained earnings. This is what managers say, this is what I need to get. And the hurdle rate ex ante is much higher than any of the ex post measures that we see on the balance sheet. So when we say how high is the hurdle rate for business investment in the UK, it's a lot higher than any of the other ex post data that we get off the balance sheet. Why it is, we don't know yet, but we think it's that the fact that it is ex ante, I'm not even gonna go to the market to try to undertake this investment, is a very important ingredient in the puzzle of understanding sluggish business investment in the UK and the associated sluggish productivity growth. So what do firms, why do firms do what they do? So again, we have a group of firms, 10,000 firms that we survey along with the University of Nottingham, called the Decision Maker Panel. All of that, we survey them every month. We get a lot of information from them about a variety of different ongoing business questions, your pricing, your wages, whether or not you're undertaking investment, what are your sales, and so forth. So we have a lot of detail. We recently have had a set of questions about hurdle rates. So what we're looking at here is that first, do all firms use a hurdle rate? We know it's higher than the other measures of cost of capital, but how many do firms use the hurdle rates? And we find the ones that use the hurdle rates as part of their decision-making are the largest firms. The smaller firms don't even use a hurdle rate. So we have a different set of issues to address when we think about business investment by smaller firms. The second observation is that firms that use hurdle rates are ones that are most likely to go to the market. So the interplay between the financial conditions out in the market and hurdle rates, the interplay between large firms and external financing seems to be a very important intersection for understanding business investment in the UK. There are two factors that make this particularly salient. The first factor is that 50% of business investment in the UK is undertaken by large firms. So if we understand this intersection of using a hurdle rate and large firms, we have a good picture of what's happening to 50% of the investment in the UK. The other 50% is everybody else, so we can't ignore them, but at least we would have a picture of the biggest player on the field. The second thing that we have learned about hurdle rates through our analysis of the data that we get from our companies is that hurdle rates are most associated with tangible investments. There are a whole range of investments here, real estate at the top, services, information communications, and so forth on the bottom. So from tangible to intangible, the use of hurdle rates is from high to low. What that suggests is that it's harder to identify what the return might be on the intangible investments. I think we heard a little bit about that with the AI example we just heard, that you don't exactly know what the return is, so you don't try to apply a hurdle rate. That could be good news, or it could be bad news, because we know they don't apply a hurdle rate, but we don't know what they use instead, necessarily. The other thing that is relevant in this particular cycle is how much the hurdle rate has changed, and how, there's an average hurdle rate. I showed you in that previous picture with the red dots. That was an average across all of the different firm sizes. And what this gives you an idea of over time, how has the hurdle rate, what's the dispersion of hurdle rates? So the bottom is different hurdle rates from basically below 5% up to 20% and above. So there's some pretty high hurdle rates. There's some pretty low hurdle rates. There's a lot of dispersion within that average that's higher than the weighted average cost of capital. The other point, however, is that over time, over the time period where base rate, my policy rate, has been increasing, there has been an increase in hurdle rate. That's the shifting of the height of the bars over time is increasing over time, even though there is a lot of dispersion that remains. But I've raised my rate by basically 500 basis points over this time period, and the hurdle rate has not gone up by that as much. So sort of this relationship between what I do as a central banker and what the firms are doing with their hurdle rates is, again, not one for one. Does that mean I'm absolved? Does that mean there's no relationship at all between 500 basis points and business investment? No, I'm not completely absolved of this relationship between business and the central bank. There is the chart on the right there shows that those companies that do use a hurdle rate have had a greater deterioration in their investment. So it is the case that there is an elasticity between my bank rate and what appears to be investment intensity in firms. So one of the factors that I come to this position, this analysis of business investment, and I say, well, on the one hand, I really need to see more business investment to support productivity growth, to enhance the supply side of the economy. I have to be conscious that my actions as a central banker in my effort to achieve my remit of 2% inflation in the medium term has trade-offs not only with respect to, for example, mortgage rates and consumption, but also has some implications for business investment as well. So the trade-offs that I face when making my decisions about how to pursue monetary policy is through the lens of both supply side and demand side on the business investment equation. Thanks.
Thanks, Catherine, for addressing this really important topic for productivity that's what's holding back investment. And I think you shed some really new light on some of the key questions here. And you will be heard a little bit more about this by my colleague, Philip McCann, who's joining us here on stage. Philip, please. Yes. You may want to put it on your jacket, actually. It's now on your shirt, I think. Oh, it's there. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Okay, is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll take a bottle of water as well, Catherine. But just before we start the conversation, I would really recommend that people have a look at this paper. It was in your opening slide, it was referred to. It's published on the TPI website and also the National Institute website. The title is UK Business Investment, Economists, Managers, Finances. It's about a 40-page piece. It's a great piece of work. And as I just said to Patricia, an academic couldn't have written it. Of course, you are academic.
Yeah.
But Catherine also has almost a unique vantage point, having worked at the Fed, all the big US institutions, and be chief economist at the OECD, at Citibank, and then more recently on the MPC, the Monetary Policy Committee, as an external member. Catherine has a kind of a landscape set of perceptions and vantage points, which is very, very hard to replicate, but that is reflected in the paper. And I think it's really important because there's material in here that relates to all the discussions we have here. And particularly I like this Venn diagram because you bring three people together, three characterizations of the economists, the economic equation, the managers, the firm decision makers, and the financiers. And in a sense, they reflect also big literatures. Economics is a literature, how economists think. The business school, the management world, how those people think, and particularly when they go into the marketplace. And then, of course, how the financiers think. That's finance. You've got these big literatures that you ought to think ought to naturally, seamlessly connect, but they don't. They sort of connect, but sort of don't. And that's really important because that's what happens, as Catherine documents in huge detail out there in the real world. They sort of connect and they sort of don't. And that's the central problem here. So the first thing is just that the material itself is a fantastic piece of work. And I think it's really important that people try to get a handle on, because this message is a very profound message. But I was going to ask you also from your experience, obviously now you live in the UK, I understand, you're living here. You know, you've come across the Atlantic, but you've also, having been obviously chief economist at OECD and so on, you've got a very much international, global perspective on these things. Given the things that you're dealing with, you've documented all the evidence and all other people's evidence as well as your own analytical framing, but what do you think is going on here? Are these cultural things? Are these institutional things? Are they governance things, structural things? These kind of puzzles in the UK. What do you sense as being the dominant drivers? Do you have a view on that?
Well, I can refer to some of the research that was done actually in 2016 at the Bank of England, and some of the research that I did and my teams did when I was chief economist at the OECD, at about the same time period, actually. And one of the things that we found was that uncertainty was a key impediment for business decision-making in general, and specifically business decision-making about undertaking new investments, short-term or long-term. So uncertainty comes in a variety of different flavors. Uncertainty can come from inflation volatility, a situation that we have just had for the last few years. Uncertainty can come from macroeconomic sales, so business cycle volatility. You don't know how much you're going to sell. You're just not sure. There's a paper that's referenced in that actually I discussed when I gave this paper at the ESCO conference. Again, done by some colleagues on the research team at the Bank of England, was sales uncertainty was a very important ingredient in business investment decision-making. So to the extent that if you're better at estimating your sales, then you're probably going to undertake investment in order to meet the demand. If you're not too sure about how much your sales are going to grow, then you're just not going to undertake the investment. So sales uncertainty, macroeconomic uncertainty, inflation uncertainty, key elements. And I might add, sales uncertainty is not only at the domestic market, global uncertainty as well. But it's also the case that policy uncertainty is another dimension of uncertainty. If you don't know whether policies that are put into place are going to stick or change, it makes it very difficult to pursue a project that has a multi-year framework. So in some sense, the concern that comes out of, as I say, both the bank work in 2016-17, there's a quarterly bulletin article and some staff working papers. We are updating that now, actually, and the work at the OECD as well, is in some sense, the biggest concern I have about the role of uncertainty is that firms still have cash flow. They're going to do something with it. They can actually pursue productivity enhancing training or new business investment, tangible or intangible. They can do that, or They can use it for buyback, for dividends, and for financial investment. And financial investment doesn't play the same role in enhancing productivity growth and enhancing the supply side of an economy. There will be people in the financial community who will disagree with me on that, but the numbers and the research is pretty clear. A buyback is not the same as, does not generate the longer term productivity growth as you know, something that enhances the capacity of the business to produce.
So if I think about your observations from living here,
Yeah.
obviously in the US, do you think the kind of financial types of investment are relatively more prevalent here than in the United States, or is it different, or different balance, or the nature of these things do you think is different?
So the two markets, of course, financial markets have very different structures, in the sense that the UK market has a smaller equity footprint, larger bank footprint, compared to the United States. So in some sense, that's a key difference. So the financialization and financial footprint here is smaller than it would be in the US. But I do think, I already made a reference to large companies using hurdle rates, and that intersection then with the financial markets is a key intersection for thinking about the drivers of business investment in the UK by the largest players. The other factor that I point out in the longer paper, and that comes from detailed Morningstar type work, Morningstar type information that the OECD has put together, the OECD database, is that the largest UK firms are owned by the largest financial institutions. And so if we think about financial institutions are gatekeepers for what it is that a business is going to do, because they are going to finance it or not. When institutional investment is so concentrated, that may well lead to a change in how much business investment will be financed. Concentration in general doesn't lead to the best outcomes.
No.
So we don't know that yet. We're in the process of doing this research using the individual firm level data on both investment, what is the firms are doing, and how it is financed. So we're pairing up those data sets now to evaluate exactly how this concentration at the firm level with big firms being concentrated doing investment and financial concentration, what the intersection of that really is looking to play out in the UK.
We have probably time for one or two questions again. Yes, Claire, question right over here. Do we have anything online, Jim? Yeah, and we'll take one question online. Sorry, have to move on, please.
Hi, it's fascinating. Thank you. My question is about measurement. So I think one of the things that occurs to me is the ability of managers to estimate what the return to an investment might be. Do you think there's a bigger role for the work of the TPI, for example, in helping managers in all sorts of organizations get better at understanding and demonstrating the value of their investments?
So I think, if you take this into a business school classroom, the answer is always yes. You know, if the better you are as a manager and as estimating the rate of return on a project, the better your company will do. However, there are two aspects that I think we have to recognize. The first is that often a hurdle rate is done in order to discipline multi-parts of a firm. If you have a multi-stage firm or multiple locations, then the top says everybody has to meet this hurdle before we're gonna agree to allocate any firm funds, whether it's internal funds or external funds. And so it's a disciplining device across the different components of the different lines of the business lines of the firm. So that's the first thing that I think means it's, you can know it's better, but can you convince the head office, that your project is better? That's always a challenge. The second thing that I think though we have to recognize is, and it's been written up in more than one, business literature, is incentive compensation plans are a really important driver of what managers decide to do when they have extra cash flow hanging around. And if the if the incentive compensation plan is maximized with financial investments instead of with sort of something that takes a little bit longer to have a return, then it's very hard to counter that.
We take one question online. Hopefully at the end we'll have a few more time for questions, but this is what we do now. Jim.
Hi, yeah. Actually, two questions, but the first, I'm not sure if you can actually answer this, but I'll ask anyway. Inflation is now back at target. How does that impact your thinking on rate cuts? Not sure if you can
Right.
answer
So
that.
I know that this is a journalist who is asking that question.
So,
right.
well, sure.
So of course I'm here talking about business investment, but I did indicate that, business investment was a key ingredient to the supply side of the economy, and that the supply side of the economy right now continues to be growing very, very slowly. We still see labor market tightness as revealed in wage growth that still remains well away from target consistent wage growth. And if we look at the decomposition of the 2% that was achieved, services prices are still rising at basically 6%. So that in order to achieve 2% sustainably, which is in the remit, we have to be 2% sustainably in the medium term, we have to see some disciplining of service sector price growth. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about restaurants. We're talking about hospitality in general. We're talking about airfares. We're talking about business services, which also are growing at about 4%. The hospitality, that sort of thing, growing at 6%. So until I see, because I get to vote, you get to know what my votes are, until I see some, sustained deceleration in services prices, I really I'm not in a position. We have more data coming in, and I'll add two more points to that. One is that goods prices in the 2%, when it was achieved the 2% target, goods prices were very, very soft. And if we look now forward to the continued issues in the Red Sea, how that's playing out in insurance costs, in container costs, in extra diesel costs, and ordering earlier, which then adds to inventory costs. Red Sea is very definitely an upside risk to goods prices. And then the final piece, of course, was energy prices have fallen. We don't think that that's going to continue. It hasn't continued since we made the decision in June. And so I've said this before, the 2% that we have seen is a touch and go, meaning we're gonna be above 2% for the rest of the year. And that matters for my decision making.
Great. Well, that was a bonus response we hadn't expected, but now we have that as well. As I said, I'm sorry we can't take more questions now, but thank you very much, Catherine and Philip. Thank you. Let us hopefully have a bit more time later. Now we're over half in this marathon, don't worry, but we still have one more to go. So if you want to stretch, this is the time to do it when Tony Venables is coming up and take us through the last lecture for the next 20 minutes. Tony, welcome.
Great, thank you. It's good. Well, thanks to the organizers. It's very, very good to be back here. It's an honor to have this honorary position. I should say this is my second inaugural lecture in this room in the space of, 3 years, which does seem a little taxing to me. But anyway,
Want to be the last
let's put that to one side, and it's not going to be a total repeat. So it's not going to be a repeat at all. So Not that anyone would remember it, but that's by the way. What I want to talk about is the question of how do we think about policies that are designed to implement transformative change? So policies or projects, maybe. Yeah, maybe the big railway line, climate change, industrial policy, things that are really supposed to be transformative. How do we go about thinking about policies like that? Do we have the apparatus to do it? I'm not sure that we do. So I want to raise those issues. I'm not going to come up with the answer of how we should appraise these policies, but I just want to lay out some of the issues. And they're issues that I've been kind of thinking about, well, struggling with, trying to get my head around, on and off, really for many years, and thinking about it for at least 3 or 4 different government departments, for a somewhat larger number of international organizations. This question has come up on how developing countries should think about big projects. And well, anyway, let me not run through a list. Well, except one item on the list, actually. I think the very first time in my life I came to Manchester was on a Treasury project. This was quite a long time ago. It was called, it was a group of us, we were the HS2 Growth Task Force. So chaired by some great and good, and we had a meeting with Howard Bernstein in a rather derelict, city hall. But it was, anyway, past history. The idea was, what should places around the country be doing to maximize the transformative effect of having this wonderful railway line arriving? But anyway, as I say, past history. What I'm going to do here is going to be fairly techie economic stuff. I'm going to say, well, I'm going to drag you through the three points there. First of all, how do we, how does the government, the Green Book, and in particular, how do economists think about policy design and ways of appraising projects to feed into these decisions? I should say immediately, this is not macroeconomics. This isn't setting the a bank rate. It's more sort of project appraisal. So it's micro stuff. Then I'm going to try and say something about what we mean by transformational change. Obviously, hideously overworked term, but say something about that. And then try and pull the strands together a little bit, and some of the sort of problems and issues that I still struggle with. But so as I say, no particularly snappy conclusion coming here, but that's the plan. Okay, so good bit of economics to start off with, right? So what I want to do here is try and sort of outline the principles that underlie all the Green Book, all the sort of decision taking that goes on. So, let me start at the very beginning. We live in a market economy that generates some sort of outcome. And obviously the state interferes here and there. The economics jargon, we call it an equilibrium. And that immediately puts people off because it says, oh, economists only talk about places where, things where nothing's happening. It's all gone flat. It doesn't mean that at all. It's just an economic outcome where our decisions are sort of consistent in some way. We're not fighting for food or anything. It's sort of hanging together. So, it might be a dynamic, stochastic general equilibrium. It doesn't just mean flat, right? And the next bit of thinking, really underpinning all this sort of micro policy thinking, is that equilibrium's efficient. The first fundamental theorem of welfare economics. Efficiency in a way that I'm not going to define now, except for well-defined things that we call distortions or market failures. And they're the things we want to target with policy, right? Point is that well-defined objects that we can sort of get hold of and think about, right? So, pollution, climate change is an externality. It's a problem. It's a well-defined problem. Monopoly power. That's a market failure. That's the distortion. Trade barriers, artificial trade barriers. We want to get rid of tariffs, right? We don't want those. And then it gets broader and wider. Well, the role of the state in the sort of tax public spending trade-off, which I'm not going to get into, and all income distributional issues. But the point I want to make here is, yeah, so those are the foundations of the sort of policy analysis that we do. And the idea is policy should be designed, or project appraisal, whatever, to fix those things. Two important principles follow from that. First one is targeting. So, if we think there's a role for the state, some potential problem, then what we've got to do is diagnose exactly what the problem is and target a policy at that problem that we've diagnosed, which is obviously a great, sound, sensible principle, right? So, if you've got a housing shortage, then you figure out, exactly what's going on with the market for land or whatever it may be and target the policy there. What you absolutely don't do is, subsidize purchases, enough said, right? If CO2 is damaging the climate, then you target a tax on emissions and so on. Well, industrial policy is a tricky one, of course. What is the market? What are the market failures? But let me skim over that. So targeting, really important. And following from that, this notion of first best, second best, third best policy. First best is really targeted, but maybe you can't do it for political reasons. So you find the next best or the next best or whatever. So, teaching this stuff to undergraduates, I tend to do a medical analogy, right? You hope the doctor does a careful diagnosis. If you've got a pain in your toe, you hope that the policy, the medication is targeted at your toe. Second best might be, below the knee amputation. Third best, higher up. And maybe you're better off without a leg than having but okay, that targeted diagnosis, targeting, right? Really important. That's the first sort of principle underlying the way it should be done, the way we teach it, where I hope the government economic service, many people think about it. The second one, I'm not sure this is a principle, but it's important. It's thinking about direct effects of policy and indirect effects. Indirect effects, maybe they're intended, maybe they're unintended consequences. They're knock-on effects. We do a policy thinking, oh, it's targeted. Oh, but it has a repercussion, somewhere else that perhaps we thought about or perhaps we didn't. So quantity targets often do that. You set a target. Well, the old story about the Soviet Union. The planning systems sometimes set a target for the number of nails produced. So you got, a billion pins that big, and sometimes set a target for the tonnage of nails produced, and you got one bloody great nail, right? So these sort of distortions flow from it. So direct, indirect effects, they can be positive, inducing investment, right? Or sort of negative. How do those direct and indirect effects actually feed into sort of project appraisal and policy design? Well, the answer is, we think they may be important. Economists are proud of not just looking at the impact effect, but the way it works through the economy. But in project appraisal, we usually ignore them, right? So, they're there. We ignore them for two reasons. One, they're very difficult. There are lots of them and possibly very small. They're just, too complicated. The other goes back to what I was saying a moment ago. If the rest of the economy is efficient, then they're of no value anyway. There are lots of little sort of changes going on, but they're of no value, so forget them, right? So they're the sort of principles. Now, something I should have said on the previous slide. Targeting, fundamental principle, and really great. It's an absolutely powerful discipline, right? Someone comes up to you sort of bleating that, oh, give me a subsidy for this or a tax break to that. And you say, no, go away. Show me the market failure that's underlying this, and we might do something about it. But it's a really, really powerful discipline. Here, well, ignoring these effects, it's a powerful simplification. It narrows the scope of policy appraisal. It gives you comparability as well. That simplicity, if you're choosing between projects, you want comparability. So these are great principles. But what I put on the bottom of that slide, well, Yeah. So what's the, if I take those principles, what's the value of something that's supposed to be transformative, like a new railway line? Well, what's its direct effect? You know, get there 5 minutes earlier. So the value of time is the benefit. Well, maybe it induces a bit of private investment or, you know, a bit of congestion, but we're going to ignore those, right? So you get this sort of nonsense position when you get to sort of big transformative policies, this nonsense position that in the case made from, you know, to the Department for Transport, there's the strategic case painting this great picture, and there's the economic case saying, well, you know, people working on the train, in which case the value of time is so and so, or are they not working? The value of time saved is something else. It's you see the problem, right? So they're the principles that are commonly employed. That's where we're starting from. Okay, now let me, the second element here. Transformational change, right? Suppose you're trying to achieve something transformational. Well, first, what on earth does transformational mean? It's obviously a hugely, horribly vague, overworked term. I actually like a sort of, somewhat sort of scientific physics sort of base definition. Yeah, transformational change is one. Okay, we've got a system, economic system, or any other sort of system. You put an input in that has an effect. It changes something. Then you withdraw the input, but there's hysteresis. The system stays in the new state. So you've kicked the system, out of its previous equilibrium into a different one. That's transformative. I'm not sure it carries that well over into some of these economic contexts, because obviously if you build a road and it transforms a place, you don't then withdraw the road. But anyway, I think that's the definition. That's what I want people to have in their heads as the notion of transformative. Making sense of that, I'm going to come back to this word equilibrium, and really, I think it's important to think in terms of multiple equilibria. So, okay, the economy reaches some state, but maybe essentially an identical economy could have reached a different state, right? So there's a non-uniqueness here. Right, so policy might, transformative policy actually wants to kick the system out of that state into a different state, right? You want to completely switch technologies that you're using to address climate change, right? You want to, in the spatial context, this is quite easy to see. A place is in a low-level trap, and you want to kick it in the. You don't just want to improve the parks. You want to, kick it into some completely different state. I always, again, teaching this, always like mentioning Chateau as an example of multiple equilibria. Everyone in this room is wearing at least 15 items manufactured in Chateau. It's the button capital of the world. 15 billion buttons a year and 200,000 kilometers of zips, right? Why does that take place in one particular, medium-sized city in China? Well, it takes place there because it takes place there. It could have been somewhere else, right? So, this sort of notion, if you like, think of an undulating surface and, balls rolling and maybe getting stuck in this little dip or maybe that one, right? So we need a theory of policy that can think about shifting between those things, not just removing a bit of grit around the edge of one of these undulations, one of these dips. Okay, anything else on there? Probably not. How am I doing? 5 minutes. Okay. Oh, no, sorry. I thought I was going to move on to policy. Not yet. Well, so one more set of issues, right? So if I want to think about multiple equilibria kicking between these things, I better say a little bit about what gives rise to them and how you get stuck in them. So three points here. They arise because of complementarities. That is to say, if I do something, it increases the value to you of doing a similar thing, right? So we're all going to herd together in a place, right? Firms are going to want to locate to each other. The downstream firm is there, so the upstream firms want to go there, right? It's the opposite of textbook economics. Textbook economics, if I do something, it might raise the price of what I've just done, which makes it less valuable for you to do the same thing. So we're way outside textbook economics here, right? So complementarities, first thing. Complementarities mean I'm not capturing all the value of my investment, right? I've done it, it's of value to me, and that makes it more valuable to you. So that's a distortion, that's a market failure. So if we're in a world with complementarities, we're in a world with an awful lot of these distortions that we want to work on, right? So that's going to be a problem. So you're probably underinvesting. You know, my investment creates a benefit to you, so I'm not capturing the entire full social benefit of the investment. It creates a problem of coordination failure, right? So we're all doing the same thing in one of our little equilibria. We might be better off if we're all collectively in a different one, getting out of the low-level trap. But I'm not going to be the first firm to move out of the cluster because I've no idea whether anyone is going to follow me, right? So it's a chicken and egg problem, a first mover problem. So we're all stuck. We need collective action. And of course, the railway line might be a catalyst. It's designed possibly to generate that collective action, to sort of kick the system. And of course, it's a complicated world. It's a world with cumulative causation, tipping points, bifurcations. I believe we now call them doom loops as of the last couple of weeks. Seems to become the fashionable phrase, right? So we're stuck in maybe virtuous circles. The booming tech center is the booming tech center, or vicious circles. A place, you lose industry, things unravel, and complementarities, firm goes, so skilled workers go, so aspirations fall, so land values fall, so building maintenance goes down, fiscal capacity in them, so complementarities of a negative sort there. Okay. Right, we have those two policy principles, targeting indirect effects. If we're after transformative change, then we better not ignore indirect effects, right? Complementarities are indirect effects. I do something that triggers you to do it, right? So really, we better stop ignoring those. We better bring them in absolutely front and center. Complementarities are usually distortions. They're market failures, so they matter. They're of value. They matter for thinking about these things. As I've already said, I think you might want policy to push the system through a tipping point. And probably there are complementarities between policies, not just between my action and your action, but between policies. So it's a multi-agency job. Right. I'm sure Bart held up 5 fingers there, not 3. Okay, I have no general theory of what we do. But you see, I think you see the issues, right? We have a beautiful theory of targeting and how to do project appraisal, but it just doesn't seem right for transformative policies. A couple of quick examples. Well, climate. Obviously the standard prescription is let's have a carbon tax. So I think a lot of the key economists, not all, but a lot of the key economists playing this area will just say, well, get the carbon tax right globally, and we're done. Well, we're not, because it's a transformative change. We need to do lots of things. We've got to trigger the R&D, which is an activity with distortions, with market failures, to get the complete technological switching point. Well, the obvious complementarity I put there, you buy an electric vehicle if there's a charging system, and you install a charging system if there are lots of electric vehicles. So yeah, chicken and egg writ large. So a carbon tax isn't sufficient. It may be necessary, or certainly desirable, but it's not sufficient. So what do? Well, we go around saying, well, there's distortion with R&D and a distortion with charging points and a distortion with something else, and have lots of targeted policies. But that begins to make no sense. We need a sort of more systems approach to joining up, recognizing the complementarities. But of course, if there are tipping points, the real problem is that we really don't know where those are. How much policy do you need to get through a tipping point? So the instruments you need maybe aren't prices, maybe they're quantities, actually setting targets, putting hard number, you will scrap your boilers or whatever it is, some quantity target to force the pace of the change. And That will help. It sets expectations and all that. That's one example. Transport infrastructure, 2 minutes. Yeah, standard cost benefit analysis there I've already mentioned. It basically looks at the value of time saving and a bit more than that. Wider benefits, wider economic benefits are now included. I've had a bit of a hand in this way back in the early days of Crossrail. The idea was, well, that will get more people into the City of London, and that will grow an agglomeration. It will attract investment, complementarities, productivity will go up. So we need to add that in as an additional benefit. The Department of Transport now does that in a horribly mechanical way for all sorts of projects that gets gamed terribly by project and proposals. But anyway, yeah, issues there where the wider benefit stuff began to make an attack on it, but left in a position that I'm not terribly happy with. Urban regeneration, obviously complementarities everywhere. I've already said between firm skills, education, demographics, the whole lot. The idea of doing targeted policy, those policy principles makes no sense. You need the big push. You need to do lots of things, from the governance and the economics simultaneously. And I think we know quite a lot about how to do it, but I'm certainly not going to stand here and tell Manchester how to do it. Manchester's done rather well on that. So final slide. And I say, I don't have any grand theory of how I still struggle with these issues. Don't have any grand theory. But let me sum up. Yeah, we need to state strategically what if we think it's going to be transformative, then let's state that strategic case clearly. Really think about what instruments you have at hand and coordinate them. They're going to be across different government departments, different bits and pieces. Try and do the economic analysis that actually aligns with the strategic case, rather than one bit talking about one thing and another bit talking about something completely different. Really aligning those is important. You have to do scenarios. These are indirect effects. So you've got to say, well, if this gets triggered, then that. If it doesn't, then something else. And we can't put probabilities on that. There's absolutely no point, in my view, doing sensitivity analysis of the type, standard errors and, dare I say, Bank of England fan charts, which I think are to be dropped. Anyway, so it's scenarios, not statistical sensitivities. Sounds complicated, but also transparency, back of an envelope check. Are the numbers actually plausible at the end, or are the developers just having you on? It's really, the strategic case should be laying out some key mechanisms that you can get hold of. But the huge risks. I mean, remember, I said those principles were really powerful, the simple principles. They discipline decision-taking. There's a real risk that as soon as we start tampering with them, anything goes. Happened a bit on some of the transport stuff, I think. You need that discipline. You need a simplicity. And you've got to remember, okay, you look at that top lot and you think, well, it's got to be case-specific, context-specific, lovely, great, of course. But the whole point, you've got to choose between doing this one or doing that one. So it better be comparable. So just saying everyone's got to have its own, context specificity is a problem. So real challenges. Anyway, let me stop.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Tony. Please take a seat. And while Gerard is coming up, this is really important stuff, because when you do productivity, as many of us in this room do, or associated with, there's so many aspects to policy that it's very easy to go out there and say, well, let's do a policy. But thinking about what the principles of good policy are really important. So I'm very happy that we have Gerard on to query this a little bit more in the next couple of minutes, please.
Thanks, Mark. That was fascinating, Tony. Like all your presentations I've seen, you never shy away from complexity and nuance, which is a strength. And I think you've made a good case for systems thinking of the sort that doesn't oversimplify. However, it also then, as you rightly pointed out, presents us with some huge challenges. So I'm not an economist. For those of you that don't know me, my background is very much in psychology, the science of human behavior. And when I look at the task environment you've described for human decision makers, which in the end, policymakers, central bankers, industrialists, managers, consumers, and ordinary citizens all are, it's horrendous. It's VUCA on steroids, isn't it? We've got high volatility, high uncertainty, high complexity, high ambiguity. And each of the areas and challenges you've highlighted are all singly multidimensional and interactive. So I'm now going to sort of switch to another branch of economics, behavioral economics. And I'm thinking of the classic people like Kahneman and Tversky and Herbert Simon, more recently, Dick Thaler and George Lowenstein's work, which then brings emotion into the picture as well. And pretty well everything you've described, they're all emotive issues. HS2, you know, I speak passionately as someone who lives in South Warwickshire, hated the project, never should have been built, but now it's been built, they're abandoning it. People are really hot under the collar about that issue. All those issues, you know, taxation, when you introduce tax benefits for certain people, it becomes highly volatile very quickly, pretty well every policy issue. So standing back, if we bring psychology into the equation, what does that do for your analysis? What does it say about the kind of tools at our disposal? Are they really up to the job? Where do we go from here? How do we sort of begin to address some of the problems that you've answered using other disciplines?
I think, I mean, who's psychology? I'm not sure whether you're talking about, you know, the citizens, the consumers, or the decision takers. But let me try and answer for both ambitiously. Yeah, behavioral economics and human responses are, you know, difficult, complex, all over, you know, many motives. Yeah, we know that. But we also know something about, you know, sort of human responses in aggregate. You know, if you subsidize something, you know, the quantity will probably go up, and you know, if you build a railway line, people will probably get on the train. So, you know, we do know something about aggregate responses if we don't know individual responses. So that is important in working out aggregate effects, obviously, and aggregate benefits. If it's the decision maker's psychology, yeah, I mean, this sounds awfully sort of complex, and that's the problem. The two principles I tried to outline at the beginning were beautifully simple, right? You know, the targeting and don't worry too much about indirect effects. But I think, but what I take from that is the importance of, you know, getting a set of fairly, you know, transparent disciplines, principles, frameworks for thinking that are a bit richer than the ones we've got at present,
right.
But without, I know, the complexity that I think you're worrying about, which would, yeah, worry me too.
Yeah, I agree with you. I just wonder how we do it in practice, and then thinking about how we carry people with us.
Yeah,
transformative change is always painful.
Yeah,
and people resist.
Yeah,
transformative change. They resist incremental change, never mind transformative change.
Yeah.
So I'm just kind of thinking ahead, really, to the future of this institute and what the next phase of work might be all about. This is the next segue, I guess, and how we can make more use of psychological insights to enrich economics. I guess that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
And really how we message to get wider constituents on board, if you like, and to get behind. We have to make this transition for sure. You know, climate change, we're failing hopelessly at the moment. We've made some steps in the right direction, but we're way below hitting the target of net zero. You know, that's a pipe dream at the moment.
Yeah, I mean,
and similarly with productivity, it's a wicked problem that's not gone away since World War II. So we're talking about real human persistence here, stickiness.
No, my first answer in terms of what we know about aggregate responses, obviously sort of got slides over distributional implications, if that's what you're getting at, rather seriously. I'm a utilitarian, basically, so I'm happy to sort of, you know, go with an aggregate, but obviously much more nuanced questions about, you know, the extent to which individuals should be able to block things. I mean, we know that HS2 was scrapped because it became too expensive, because small areas were essentially given veto rights, unless they were bought out at huge expense, and that's what caused the project to fail. But that just highlights the importance of your question. How do we actually bring people with us? You know, there's some sort of aggregates, whatever that means.
Subgroups as well. You get subgroup dispersions, and they're aggregates, but they can be quite large subgroups that disagree fundamentally. So we have to find a new way.
But without that becoming a blocking mechanism, which clearly, as I say, destroyed HS2 amongst other things.
Let's take, I think I have a question online. Maybe we start with the online question, Jim?
It's the previous point there, actually, Anthony. Is the economic case for a transformational change easier to see after the event? And for instance, now we can clearly see the benefit, or the economic benefit of Crossrail. And the question says, does it suggest a role for case studies of historic transformation policies?
Well, I think the answer is yes and yes. There are sort of the classic ones, the Victoria line in London, which I don't know, I think it scraped through a cost-benefit analysis. And then someone did an ex post, and hugely successful, and Crossrail, they get us.
I'll take one question.
So I guess, but it's also a matter of learning from those ex post things to learn from what goes wrong.
Diane?
Thank you for that, Tony. So interesting. What kind of institutional lessons do you draw from this? Are there places, governments that have done it particularly well, or might mission boards be a good way to think in a disciplined way about transformation?
I haven't thought about it very much, but mission units, mission boards are the obvious mechanism. And obviously, I mean, we've always had them to some extent. You know, mayoral, development, whatever they're called, corporations. So boards empowered to join things up, and possibly, I mean, the mission boards, the obvious.
One more question here from Philip, then we take one there, and then we'll go to the final panel. Oh, you were here. Great.
Tony, I was just, I mean, you looking back on your career, obviously you started really as a trade economist, doing a lot of analytical work, and obviously then with your work with Paul Krugman and others, you moved into the kind of trade, cities, geography, that arena, but then also then onto transport issues, cities. And then obviously then you applied a lot of these thinking then in the developing country context, those challenges, but back in the OECD context again. How is your thinking about these things that you've discussed today? How do you think it's changed or shifted or developed over that period as you've kind of moved through these different arenas?
Well, I'd love to say it's become infinitely richer and more sophisticated and better informed. I mean, you get, the institutional side is there hanging over so much of it. And it's not something I've really worked on and studied in the thinking about how to do the political economy and the institutional side, but it does hang over it all. But at the same time, yeah, the need for pretty tight top-down disciplines on the way it's done. So devolution, but yeah, within pretty tight frameworks.
And then one question here, and then we have to move on. I'm sorry.
Hi there, Andy Bruce from Reuters. I just wonder, Diane actually mentioned it just a minute ago, about which countries you see as good models for, good policy design and things like that. And also I wondered, has there ever been a time or a period when Britain has been good at that, or when was it best for at that anyway? Thank you.
Britain was always good on cost-benefit analysis, right? So the hard, basic, technical cost-benefit, doing it carefully, scientifically. Arguably, that's meant we missed out on the Grand Projet, as you'd expect, the sort of thing I've been talking about, and therefore haven't built enough infrastructure. So we've been good technically on that. I'm sure the Department for Transport would say, well, yeah, but now we've widened it out to wider economic benefits, and we're world leading on that. And indeed, that is imitated by a lot of countries now. So I guess Britain's been good at sort of doing the fairly techie, hard cost benefit stuff, but has, I think, been at a cost of not liking the word transformative, right?
Well, you did very well on it, though, in the last couple of minutes. So good. Thanks very much for this. Thanks, Gerard. Let's invite Catherine and Tera to the stage here as well, and we'll have a wrapping up conversation, just a couple more minutes, and then Tony, you stay here as well, and we'll take a few more questions, of course, if they come in. So, we've given this free lectures, and thank you so much for keeping us on time and having such an interesting conversation also from the audience. So we've given it this sort of big title of transformative power of productivity. And I'm really trying to pull this together now, because we've got this technology story from you, Tera, and then we have this need for investment. And I think Tony really brought this home in a great way and say, okay, but if we want to change, we need to think about what that means from a policy perspective. And really, I think, Tera, and maybe I can start with you, what it really makes me think is about the word that actually didn't come up in our conversation so far is uncertainty. And of course, implicitly, it's very much in what you were talking about, implicitly, but you didn't talk much about it explicitly. And still you think about, there are these big shocks happening, and how do organizations, whether are businesses or whether there are policy organizations, deal with that concept of uncertainty? Because productivity is about long-term investment. It is about sticking the course on technologies to make them work in your organization. If you talk about transformative policy, as you defined it also, Tony, earlier on, it is about something that's going to stick over time. So how do we handle that uncertainty in that environment of those big shocks in order to make these things happening that you're talking about?
So I think we need to accept it, first of all, and then we need to categorize things. I like to think of them in three buckets. First of all, there's the no regrets moves. Under almost any scenario, these investments, these policies will make sense, and let's just get on and do those. So I would give you an example of energy efficiency. Even at low energy costs and zero carbon price, it would make sense to do a lot of stuff around energy efficiency. It would improve the planet. We don't need to know anything about whether China is going to reduce their carbon emissions or what the carbon price is going to be. Let's just do them. The second class of things, and that applies to policy as well as business decision making. The second class is around scenarios, and all of you have spoken about scenarios where, under certain circumstances, things are going to pan out and turn out to be a really good investment, and under others, they aren't. I think the trick there is to build optionality, to say, well, let's not go whole hog because we cannot know which scenario we're going to be in, but let's build some capability, let's build some technology, let's collaborate with other people, let's be kind of ready to move when we are a bit clearer which part of the fork of the road we're about to head into. And the final is you have to make some big bets. I think you have to accept that some of them will not always work out, but if you don't, you never get to a point where you've transformed something. And so I always think both from a business and policy perspective, and I think this is consistent with, I think with both of what Catherine and Tony were saying, is it's a portfolio game. Not everything you do in it is going to work out 100%. So you have to build a portfolio and accept that the average return is going to be great, but there are going to be some failures along the way. And that's just a fact of not having a crystal ball.
The other thing, Catherine, I want to talk about is adaptability. So I think what I found interesting is when you spoke from these three perspectives of the business manager, the investor, or the financier, and the economist, it sort of made me realize there are so many different actors in this system. And when it comes to investment, these actors partly interact on markets. They interact on financial markets, they interact on product markets, but there are also institutions, including the central bank, for example, that influence the decision making and try to get away from some of these market imperfections, or actually deliberately drive markets in a particular direction. Now, particularly when it comes to finance, a lot of that institutional fabric is actually well established. We have the central bank, we have financial market authorities, we have public and semi-public entities that deal with investment and so on. But yet, when you see these very large transformations happening, the system that is organized as such also needs to change along. So I'm trying to think, when these big transformations come down our road, how does the system, that whole fabric of markets and institutions that organize themselves, change along with these big transformations that are happening?
I guess you're sort of suggesting that there's the change first, and then the institutions go along with. Well, I would suspect that it's more endogenous, as in, if the institutions aren't adapted and the markets are not adapting, then you don't get the transformational change either. And I think we see that in some of the pushback that is in policy communities with regard to earlier versions of AI, the digitalization and data protection. And so that is a case where, and these are things back in the 1990s, I wrote a book about how there were different approaches to data security, data collection, data privacy between the United States and the European Union. Those differences continue to remain, and the business community kind of has to navigate that. The financial community navigates that. When I wrote this book when I was at Peterson Institute for International Economics in 1998. I could just change the copyright, and that chapter would be identical. I wouldn't have to do anything to it. And I think the point that comes out of this, and it's with regard to the psychology, the behavior of the psychology that's very important. There are reasons why these policies differ on, security. I'm just going to use the example of data, right? Security, collection, security, transfer, and privacy. There are reasons why those differ across countries, and that's cultural. It's in the fabric of the policymaking communities, and I don't think that is going to change. So the navigation of that by private sector actors, whether they be financial actors or business actors, or actually individuals too, you can kind of change where you want to live based on which environment you want to be in. That's that there's a response to those more really deep fundamental differences that are reflected in the institutional environment.
Interesting. Tony, I think you
Well,
want to
I was just
respond to
going to
this,
say,
so
I mean,
please do so.
kind of, I mean, setting expectations is so important here, though, isn't it? I mean, I think, Bart, you were asking about some parallel processes of getting this moving. So, you know, the word coordination failure come to mind again. It's how you can really, you know, set expectations such that people are confident you're moving along, you know, path, you know, from here to there. So obviously uncertainty can be possibly reduced by that. We all know the importance of stability in a policy environment. So somehow managing to set sort of credible expectations about a path that will take us to, I mean, that's got to make it easier to get there, right? If there's fairly widespread confidence that
the continued extension, I think, is, and it's true for productivity, it's true for the current new government, is that on the one hand, we're asking for all these things, stability and certainty and more clarity, and it takes time. And at the same time, we need to see some results now in order to be able to take people along the journey. So I think it's ultimately comes back, and we're debating that a lot amongst ourselves about, well, how do we balance the short-termism and the long-termism? Any thoughts?
And so stability, I'm not sure stability is the right word. We're in an environment where change is the word. Volatility, you know, my world, I think there's going to be a lot more inflation volatility going forward, and I'm going to have to deal with that. And from a policy perspective, so is the business community and the financial community and individuals. So stability is not necessarily the right word. I think what matters in terms of setting expectations is setting out a set of incentives, whether it be rules, whether it be taxes, whatever, setting out a set of rules or strategies which don't change. So don't keep changing the rules of the game. Right? Here are the rules of the game. We're going to play this game. You're going to play it. You're going to play it. You're going to play it. And you have to adjust. And we can talk about policies that facilitate adaptability and so forth. But the more, if you keep changing the rules of the game, then nobody knows what they're supposed to do. And the devolution of that is nobody does anything at all. And you certainly don't get transformational change out of it.
I promised the team that we would be out of here at 1:45, so that gives me 5 more minutes for any questions that people still would want to raise. Let's start right here with Duncan. Then Graham, you already had your hand up earlier.
Just maybe more of a meta question and building on Jared's comment. So I'm just wondering, I mean, Adam Tooze talks about we're living in the era of the poly crisis. And I just wanted to ask the panel, I mean, is there something distinctive about the intersection of various kinds of economic, social, and political crises today that requires us to think differently about the policy levers? And in many ways, you've been talking about very traditional economic levers for thinking about policy, and just now you said we just need to fix the rules and stick to them. But is there something different about the world we live in today along the lines of the poly crisis that requires more radical thinking to address the transformational change that's required?
Who wants to take it? Tera, you want to start?
I can start off. I don't think the world has changed as much as we all claim or pretend or say it has. I think we have, however, historically ignored a lot of the sorts of things that both Tony and Catherine have been talking about. The fact that people's hurdle rates are higher than the theoretical of what it should be when economists calculate it. We've ignored the psychological issues of people stick to simple rules and heuristics, and they don't pick up the $10 bill on the floor, even if it exists, because they're busy and they're distracted and they're lazy. And we don't, there's never been a world in which it didn't matter to have complementarities and transformational issues in policymaking. It's just that I think we've just gotten wiser over time and started to have openness to think about those things. We've accepted that the previous toolkit didn't quite work. And so in that sense, never waste a good crisis. It's a good way to kind of bubble up the importance of the issues that were already always there. We just didn't pay enough attention to them until now.
Tony, and then we'll take Graham.
Well, I was just going to say that, I mean, maybe the last poly crisis took John Maynard Keynes to provide the intellectual foundations for how to get out of it and to build the post-war institutions that actually worked for 70 years. Anyway.
Great.
Very quickly,
Sorry,
very quickly, do we have the capability of transformational change, institutional capability? So take the HS2 example. Yes, there were stakeholder claims which drove up the cost of HS2. But NAO reports show that the fundamental problem was the utter inability of the Department for Transport and HS2 Limited in different ways to manage the project. And the other business case, the commercial case, where they utterly failed in relationship with their suppliers. So there's a whole set of institutional factors about managing these changes that we don't talk about very much.
Who wants to take that one?
I'm happy to provide my 2 cents worth, having worked as chief economist in government for 10 years, including at the Department for Transport. I don't think we do have the institutional capability, but that is a kind of hope that I have for this next set of government initiatives, that we're going to build some of it. As an economist, I love looking at numbers, and one of the things that is quite frustrating about the narrative that has emerged of the last several years around austerity is that we need to cut the number of civil servants. Well, they're 1% of the total government budget. The rest is all what those civil servants spent the money on, and surely that's being kind of what's that saying? Penny wise, pound foolish. I'm not saying we should spend more money on the civil service, but I do think the questions around capability and capacity and sustained organizational memory and multidisciplinarity are hugely important, because as Tony has demonstrated, there isn't going to be a single discipline. It's not going to be the economists or the engineers or the data scientists who are going to be able to get all of this stuff together. And so I'm hoping that as part of the kind of reinvention of various different institutions around government, there's also a reinvention around just leadership and capability, because that is sorely needed.
Great. Well, we've had you here for 2 hours and 15 minutes, and we're quite often been told that people don't have that attention span, but I think it shows that we can do it if you bring the right people to the podium, plus the discussants. So a great thank you to all of you for doing this. It's a great conversation. So. And of course, there's an opportunity to continue the conversation